Hey everybody, how are you doing? It's kind of crazy, isn't it? Going to school at home. This is my companion. You want to see who I have with me today? That's Abby. You guys hear all kinds of stories about her. She's so calm right now. You don't believe any of my crazy stories, do you? How about you guys? Do you think it's interesting to be at home and have your pets and your brothers and sisters and your parents there with you? Well, I was trying to think of a way that we could all feel like we were continuing our class and something that we always enjoyed doing. So I thought that we would maybe try to read aloud a little bit every day. So we're going to try this as an experiment. So what I want you guys to do is after you watch the video, I want you to try to go on Seesaw once you do today's work and post a comment, or it'll say a post, create a post. And I want you to create a post telling me that you were able to see the video and that you want to either continue the read aloud or maybe we can try something else, okay? So just know that I am the only person that can see what you post on Seesaw, but I can also write back to you. So Ms. Gaines and I really want to try using it out and see if we can't use it as a way for me to talk to you directly so that we're not always having to go through your parents' email. So just give it a try. And then we'll kind of see from your parents and see what you guys think and see if you like it. You can't hurt anything on it. It can't mess it up. You can try to do whatever you want to do and see what happens. I even posted an announcement this morning, so you can see if you can find that on there. And actually, it was late last night because I was trying to make sure I knew how to make it work. So let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to tell you guys? Nope, I think that's it. So let's see where we were on our read aloud, okay? I'm only going to do a few minutes today because I'm running kind of short on time. I want to make sure I have this finished and posted so that you guys can watch it today. But in the future, I'm hoping to be able to read at least 20 minutes a day. So let's see here. Get my glasses, you guys know that, right? All right, so where do we leave off? Because it was a while since we read. We didn't get to read at the end of last week, did we? Let's see. Oh, remember? He was wanting the lemon. Remember that? Remember old Scabs was wanting the lemon? And he had just explained to them. I feel like we've already read that, haven't we? Maybe that's what I marked for Ellie where we left off for her. Yeah, this is it, isn't it? Chapter 10. A breeze over the hill. All right. The ravens had just flown overhead, remember? And they were trying to hide in the sand. Okay, now it's coming back to me. Y'all ready? Peter couldn't sleep. There were several good reasons for this. First, it was almost noon and the sun was already blisteringly hot. Second, he was buried up to his neck in itchy, bug-ridden sand. And finally, just a few hours earlier, a monstrous flock of ravens had flown right over his head. No matter how Peter reassured himself that his current hiding place was as safe as any, his survival instinct was telling him to keep moving. He listened to the gentle snoring of Sir Toad and old Scabs buried on either side of him. "Sir Toad," he whispered. The knight's mustache twitched. "Land ho!" he murmured dreamily, then jolted upright, remembering the previous night's events. "Wait, what? Are they back?" "No, but I want to explore a bit while old Scabs is sleeping." Peter quietly pulled himself out of the sand. "Come on," he said, helping his friend free. Sir Toad yawned and shook a tick from his ear. "Are you certain we should go traipsing about like this? The old coot warned us it wasn't safe to travel in daylight. Just this once, I'm inclined to believe him." "We'll be fine." Peter emptied the sand from his sack and slung it over one shoulder. "We walked all yesterday without running into trouble." "Ugh," the knight groaned. No trouble at all, unless you count heat stroke, blisters, and axe-wielding wardens." After some debate, Peter convinced Sir Toad that the best course of action would be to explore farther east before returning to Old Scabs in the late afternoon. That would still leave us a few hours to rest before heading back out again, he persuaded his friend. Sir Toad agreed to the plan, but only on the condition that he be allowed to ride in Peter's bag. Seriously, he's going to have Peter carry him? He's not even going to walk? Okay, The two set off in the direction they had been following the previous night, searching for signs of life. In the daylight, they did not have to search very long. "I say, Peter, there are men sleeping all over this place," Sir Toad said from his new perch. It was true. Hidden in the shadows of every wrecked boat was the snoring head of a prisoner, which stuck out from the sand like some sort of unsightly weed. "It's a wonder we didn't spot them before." "It seems like all the prisoners treat their wrecked boats like houses," Peter said. "I bet when old Scabs was calling out boat names, he was actually saying hello to other thieves." The boy's deduction was spot on. On the whole, the prisoners of the Just Deserts was extremely territorial. When they first arrived, each man claimed the wreckage of the vessel that brought him. Every day when they slept, the prisoners would bury themselves in the shade of the shattered hull. In fact, the reason that old Scabs discovered Peter and Sir Toad in the first place was because they had inadvertently squatted beside his home, Scab's Joy. "What do you think their crime was?" Sir Toad asked. "I'm not sure, but it must have been something awful to deserve this fate." The most common punishment in Peter's hometown had been hanging. The thought of public execution had always terrified him, but perhaps life in this place was worse than death. "They all sound so miserable, not to mention the way they smell." "They don't look much better, I assure you," Sir Toad observed. The idea that he might possibly end up like one of these prisoners made Peter ill. "That's all the more reason for us to find a way out of here and help whoever wrote that message." The two travelers kept on exploring until just before noon, when they decided to stop and find something to eat. Though Peter had no interest in swallowing bugs, he knew how important it was to keep strong. Sir Toad, on the other hand, had gotten over his initial queasiness and now was having a delightful time discovering all sorts of savory new insects. Not half bad," he said, chomping merrily on a spotted sand weevil, "as long as you keep away from those stingers." Peter was not listening. A breeze had just rolled over the crest of this next sand dune, and it came with a sweet new fragrance. He raised his nose, taking in the cooler air. "There's water over that way. I'm sure of it," he said. Sir Toad was still growing accustomed to his companion's extraordinary senses. Balked. "Wait, you can smell water?" he said. Peter ignored the comment. "It's maybe half a league away," he said. "If we can find a water source, we might be able to fish for some real food." He started off in a new direction. Sir Toad spit out his mouth full of bugs and followed after him. Within a few minutes, they had reached the top of a large hill. "Good heavens," Sir Toad said. "Remind me never to doubt your nose." The boy grinned. "I thought you might say that." He could now hear a faint trickling sound ahead. "It must be a spring of some kind. Do you think there might be any fish in it?" Sir Toad gave a wry chuckle. "Boiled, maybe. It looks like a giant rock, and it's shaped exactly like a tea kettle." The knight stared at the bizarre landmark, trying to decide whether or not it might be a mirage. "It's got a handle and spout and everything." Looming in the distance was indeed a large boulder shaped like a kettle. It was roughly the size of a house and had been hollowed out and filled with water. "I can feel a current moving underground," Peter said when they came closer. "It must flow up through the bottom like a well." The pair managed to scale the handle without too much trouble. There were no signs of fish in the water, but it was at least potable, which means drinkable. Potable water is drinkable water. A lot of times when you go to a nursery and see plants and stuff, it'll have non-potable water on it because it's just water that they're using to water the plants and they're not wanting you to drink it. Can you guys hear all the planes flying today? I live next to Langley, but it must be because it's sunny. They are just going like crazy. I hope it's not bothering you guys. All right, where was I? Potable. "Who do you think put it here?" Peter mused, dipping his blistered feet into the pool. "Someone strong, or at least very determined." Sir Toad examined the chisel marks on its surface. From this height, he could see nearly all of the Just Deserts, and he took the opportunity to scout their surroundings. "I think I see a border in the distance. The horizon ends with a long stripe of black that stretches out in both directions. Some kind of wall or fence, maybe? And right in the middle, there's a spire poking into the sky. That must be the prison gates. Do you think we can make it by landfall?" "Perhaps," Sir Toad squinted. "It's hard to tell from here." Well, at least we know we're headed in the right direction, and in the meantime, we can rest a moment before walking again. While the professor's wineskin did an adequate job of keeping them alive, it was far from ideal. Trekking through the desert had left both of them extremely dusty, and not a little chapped. Moreover, the last bath taken by either of them had been in the troublesome lake some time ago. Ugh, that was a long time ago. Though boys generally make a point of hating baths, Peter Nimble was willing to make an exception just this once. The cool water instantly revived the two travelers. After some experimentation, they figured out a way to use the spout as a sort of shower tap. Whenever one of them jumped into the well, it would raise the water level and spray out a refreshing stream. Oh, that's just like the reading passage we just did. Remember the one where the bird kept putting the pebbles in the pitcher to make the water rise? Well, that's what they're doing. The kettle also proved a perfect spot for Peter and Sir Toad to improve their swimming skills. Because of the rock's curved walls, they were about to support themselves while they practiced breathing, kicking, and diving. By the end of an hour, they were both able to keep themselves somewhat afloat. Once the travelers were thoroughly clean, they stretched out on the rim of the rock and dried themselves under the desert sun. What do you think lies on the other side of that wall? Sir Toad asked. Peter shrugged. The vanished kingdom, I hope. Whatever we find, I'm sure will answer at least some of our... Sir Toad turned and regarded his silent friend. Some of our what? But the boy had become still, for in that moment a great shadow slid over his body, blotting out the sun. Peter clasped Sir Toad's mouth shut. He lay rigid, listening in terror as a noise overhead grew louder and louder. It was the sound of wings, and it was headed straight for them. That's the end of the chapter. Okay, I'll read one more chapter, but I gotta get comfortable. Hold on. I gotta get something here. Oh, so I can lean back. Hold on. Ooh, that's better. Okay. The Ravens of Kettle Rock. You want to see it? I know it's backwards in the video, but you can still tell. It's kind of weird shaped rock, isn't it? I feel like somebody would have had to make that. Peter lay completely still as the giant flock wheeled overhead. How many are there? He whispered to Sir Toad. The knight stared at the storm of black wings thundering across the sky. Thousands, he said, swallowing hard. Perhaps they'll pass without seeing us? Keep calm, whatever you do. The boy knew his friend was prone to panic. In truth, he was just as frightened as Sir Toad. Peter could almost feel their eyes scanning the sand as the birds flew a circle around the rock. He tensed at the sound of razor-sharp talons breaking against the wind. They're coming to land, he said. Our only chance is to hide in the water before they reach the rock. In the water? Forgive me, but I seem to have misplaced my gills. The boy put a reassuring hand on his friend's foreleg. When I say so, we'll both dive below the surface and swim up inside the spout. If we can make it to the top, we'll be able to breathe without being seen. It was a feeble plan, but he could think of nothing better. Peter listened carefully to the raven's movement. Sunlight slid back over his skin as birds swooped southward, dipping briefly behind a dune. Now, he said. The two rolled themselves into the water seconds before the mighty ravens touched down all over them. For Peter, being submerged was like being in a nightmare. While his expert ears could still pick out echoes, it was near impossible to identify where they were coming from. He couldn't smell without inhaling water, of course, and his hands and feet were too busy kicking to be of any real use. Peter could hear the tiny splashing of beaks snapping at the water surface. Could ravens swim? No, they were only drinking at the top of the well. The splashing sounds grew more and more faint as he and Sir Toad kicked deeper toward the bottom of the kettle. He knew the spout must connect down there somewhere. At last his hands found an opening in the rock. He pushed Sir Toad up into the spout's entrance and wiggled in after him. Peter remembered the last time he and the knight had been underwater like this. They had been fighting against each other. Now that the two of them were working together. Peter was about halfway up the spout when his lungs began to give out. The narrow walls were closing around him. His veins felt like they were going to explode. Sir Toad's hoof connected with his nose, and he tasted his own blood spreading on the water. The boy struggled on, cutting his feet and arms against the wall of a rock. He could think of nothing but air, of nothing but the surface. His heart was pounding so loudly he was sure the birds could hear it. He didn't care. He had to breathe again. Peter finally broke the water's surface. He was wedged next to Sir Toad, inches away from the lip of the spout. Cold water lapped around his chin. The master thief panted heavily, trying to hear what was happening outside. Had the birds seen them dive into the well? There was squawking all around the rock. It sounded like talking, but it was difficult for Peter to make out any words. Pausing for a moment, he took control of his heartbeat. Slow, slower, stopped. Calming his hands, his nose, his ears, he concentrated on the scene outside. There was definitely voices mixed in with the squawking. It sounded like arguing, but then it may have just been the way the birds talked. The flock grew quiet as an incoming bird landed among them. "Captain Amos, we found the vessel!" it shouted. "And what of the warden, Eli?" another raven responded. This one sounded much more confident than the first bird. Its voice reminded Peter of the admirals he had heard marching about his port town. "Did Trolley know why they had come?" "The warden knew nothing, sir. He claimed they flew eastward. He believed they had magic carpets with them." "Rubbish!" "Oh, wait. Isn't that what Peter and Sir Toad told that the officer guy that very first tried to brand them and whatnot? Didn't they tell him that they had magic carpets?" I think they did. What do you think? "Rubbish! Carpets don't fly, not even magic ones." "Still, we should patrol the border in case they plan to cross." The second bird, the one they had called Captain Amos, went on. "Titus, I am holding you responsible for finding these strangers. Take an unkindness of 50 back to the nest and keep lookout for 2 travelers, a boy and a cat." "Oh no, it is them." "You heard him," Titus squawked. "Flap." A group of ravens leapt into the air, proclaiming, "Long live the true king!" The rest of the flock responded as one, "And long live..." this is what they responded, "And long live his line!" The birds cawed and flapped, cheering the small troop as it disappeared into the skies. Peter was confused by what he was hearing. The ravens sounded like an army of some kind. They had clearly been alerted to his and Sir Toad's arrival. They also made reference to some unkindness they were plotting, which confused him even more. Were these ravens planning to hurt someone? Perhaps the king? No, they had said, "Long live the true king." Whatever was going on, Peter knew he and Sir Toad weren't safe where they were. It would only take one bird to glance casually into the kettle's spout, and they would be discovered. No sooner had this thought crossed his mind when he heard a scratching by his ear. A pair of talons had settled onto the lip of the rocky spout. Peter grabbed Sir Toad, who was still breathing heavily, and pinched his mouth shut. The knight struggled in protest. He couldn't breathe, right? But Peter expertly began stroking his throat, keeping a firm grip on a special pressure point behind his ears, an old trick he had learned from Mr. Seamus for sedating ornery house cats. "Whew, thank you, Mr. Seamus," the boy thought to himself for the first time in his life, as Sir Toad became still. Hold on. Gotta get a drink of water. Hold on. Okay, now I'm ready. The scraping noise became louder as the raven poked its bill into the spout. "Ugh, the water is foul this day," it said, inching closer to Peter's head. It smelled tainted, as though someone... His investigation was interrupted by a cry. "Look here!" a voice called from the base of the rock. "I found signs of a traitor!" The raven at the spout jumped away to join Captain Amos and a few others on the ground. "I noticed a lump in the sand when I landed," the first raven went on. "It looks like there's a weapon inside." Oh, Peter knew at once what they had discovered. His burgle sack, which he had hidden, apparently not well enough, before climbing the rock. "This blade is not from the armory," Captain Amos said. Peter listened as the birds pecked at the metal. "It must have come with the strangers." These words caught the attention of the rest of the flock, many of whom flew closer to see. "We should patrol the immediate grounds," Captain Amos continued. "Asher, Jude, search the area for tracks. If they have been here recently, we may be able to follow them. 2 ravens squawked, "Yes, sir," and took to the air. The other raven set to inspecting the rest of the objects inside the bag. Peter listened to the sound of beaks removing its contents one at a time. His burgle kit, the box of eyes, the wineskin, the riddle. "Let me see that scroll," Captain Amos ordered, taking the piece of paper in his talons. After a moment, he turned to the flock. "You all should hear this," he said, reading the words aloud. "Kings aplenty, princes few. The ravens scattered and seas withdrew. Only a stranger may bring relief, but darkness will reign unless he's..." The birds absorbed these words in silence. "A traitor?" one bird whispered. "Who would dare summon a traitor?" "Someone who is either very foolish or very desperate," Captain Amos replied coldly. "Whoever wrote this petition, it is clear they do not know of us." A grumbling rose up from the flock. 10 years we've waited for word from the other side," a voice called out. "And this is what we get? How much longer will justice ignore us?" another cried, to which several more ravens squawked in agreement. And justice is capitalized like it's a proper noun, so like it's a name. And it says, "How much longer will justice ignore us?" another cried, to which several more ravens squawked in agreement. "Peace, brothers," Captain Amos called out in a reproving tone. The birds fell silent to let their leader speak. "I hear your concern, but we must remember to keep faith." Peter sensed that the bird was fighting to suppress his own disappointment. "It is clear that these strangers are somehow connected to our tale, but whether for good or ill remains to be seen. Perhaps this box will hold the answers we seek." "Oh," Peter cringed as he heard the sound of a beak pecking against the keyhole. He silently prayed that ravens, even murderous talking ones, could not open locks. Click. The boy listened, horrified, as the birds lifted the lid and peered inside. "Sweet justice," Captain Amos said after a moment, and justice is capitalized again. The ravens crowded closer and began to whisper amongst themselves. "What magic is this? But Simon, Mordecai, could it be?" Soon every voice in the group was chanting the same thing. "The line, the line, the line." Peter did not understand what any of this meant. All he knew was that these ravens had discovered the fantastic eyes and were somehow alarmed by what they saw. He could hear their hundreds of hearts beating faster and faster. "The line, the line, the line." The chanting continued until it was interrupted by the return of Asher and Jude. "Traitor approaching!" they squawked. "Port side!" The flock fell silent and immediately leapt to action. Every bird that was perched upon the rock hopped clear and glided to the sand. Peter could tell they were waiting for something. But what? A new voice answered his question. "Keep away, little voice," it cried, approaching with frantic steps. "Keep far away from Kettle Rock, says I." Peter realized at once who it was. Old Scabs must have woken up and followed their tracks to the spot. He clenched his jaw and silently begged for the old man to turn back. As little as he liked the crazy old felon, he liked the ravens even less. But old Scabs kept on. "Little boy and kitty pet must heed what old Scabs says. Get out of daylight before..." His voice left him as he topped the ridge to find 1,000 ravens waiting for him. The old thief fell to his knees, choking with terror. Captain Amos hopped forward. "Traitor! You have been shown mercy on the condition that we never see your miserable pink carcass again." "Oh, old Scabs knows it, he does." "You have returned our consideration by flaunting your accursed face during daylight. Even more, you have trespassed upon our sacred rock." "Old Scabs is sorry, he is. Terrible sorry. Please don't peck him to pieces. The ravens is kind and merciful. They forgave him once before. Old Scabs remembers it." "Once and never again. That was our promise." "Promise, says you?" A bitterness crept into the man's voice. "Don't tell old Scabs of promises. By promises, he should be a rich man." The outburst was met by cold silence, and old Scabs instantly realized that he had made a grave error. I see our mercy was wasted on you, the raven said. We shall waste it no longer. Wait, wait! The miserable old man scrambled to his feet, getting an idea. The ravens never asked why old Scabs came by their rock. He was coming to bring the ravens a gift. Two juicy little strangers, I'm leading them straight to the nest. Old Scabs was... Peter heard these words but could not believe them. Was old Scabs really planning to betray them? The old man gave a devilish cackle. It's true, plump kitty cat and fresh little blind boy, just for your... His words were cut off by a storm of flapping and squawking. No! As he howled as the birds attacked. By now, Peter had given up stealing his heartbeat. He had also forgotten all about stroking Sir Toad's neck. The two were shaking with terrible fear. Old Scabs had been pecked to pieces not 20 paces from where they hid. Peter's lips trembled as he held his friend close. He could taste Sir Toad's salty tears, which were streaming down his snout and into the water. They huddled together, listening to the final cries of their former guide. There was a solemn hush in the moment after the execution. Captain Amos spoke again, this time more softly. Traitor, we shall bury you in one piece. That is more than you deserve. May the worms of the earth show you similar kindness. He raised his voice to the flock. In justice we say, long live the true king, the others called back. The raven somberly went about digging a shallow hole in the sand for old Scabs. Peter listened intently to every sound, and as he did, he wondered about the man's dying words. Would he really have delivered Peter and Sir Toad to these wicked creatures? Peter's mouth had gone completely dry. He sipped of some of the water around his neck, but found himself too nauseated to swallow. Peter, Sir Toad whispered as quietly as he could, are we going to die? To this question, the master thief had no answer. Outside, the birds had completed their task and moved on to other matters. Eli, Captain Amos commanded, take the weapons in this box to the nest. Real or not, we cannot risk letting them fall into our enemy's hands. Yes, sir, the raven named Eli responded. He snapped the objects in his claws and started for the horizon. We're almost finished with the chapter. Captain Amos turned back to the flock. Brothers, it is a great riddle indeed that brings blind strangers and rhyming scrolls to our deserts. Whether or not the line has returned remains to be seen. As always, we steel our beaks, sharpen our claws, and wait for justice. Peter detected a new urgency in the captain's voice. We can only assume that our enemy has learned of the strangers as well. I have no doubt he will try to strike. And if he does, we shall not fail a second time. He beat his great wings against the air, soaring high as he squawked, Long live the true king! And there was a mighty roar as 1,000 birds flapped after him. And long live his line! Peter and Sir Toad waited until nightfall before wiggling back down the rocky spout. This was even more difficult than swimming up, and by the time they worked their way to the base of the kettle, they barely had strength to kick to the surface. They came up to a cool moonlight. Peter rolled himself onto the top of the rock and listened to the desert air. Far, far away, he could hear footsteps. Maybe more prisoners? He listened again for the sound of wings or talons or claws. Nothing. He helped Sir Toad onto his back and climbed down to the sand below. The ground around the kettle was still heavy with the stench of violence. Do you see him? He asked, shivering a bit. To your left, about 30 paces. Sir Toad led him to a small mound of sand that they stood in silence over poor old Scab's graves. No one deserves that. The boy's voice was tense with rage. Peter was no stranger to violence or even death, but nothing had prepared him for this. Old Scabs had been murdered in cold blood. Peter could not say how exactly, but he knew that this event had profoundly changed both him and his journey. He returned to the base of the rock and began collecting his scattered possessions. The ravens had left everything but his fish hook and the box of fantastic eyes. Among the items, he found old Scab's precious lemon. Peter carried it to the grave. Sleep well, old thief, he said, crushing the fruit in his hand. The cuts on his arm stung as the juice ran down his wrist and dribbled over the sand. Sir Toad stepped to his side, blinking across the endless desert. It sounded like those birds understood our riddle. Of course they did, Peter said bitterly. It's about them. Whoever wrote it needs us to stop the ravens. Sir Toad suppressed a shudder. I hope you're wrong. They've got us beat in numbers and strength. Even with the fantastic eyes, it would have been bad. These words filled Peter with fury and shame. The professor had specifically warned him against letting others learn of the fantastic eyes, and now, thanks to the ravens, he had failed. Our first step is to steal the eyes back. Then we'll worry about fighting. He hefted his bag over one shoulder and started off in the direction of the great spire, the spot the birds had referred to as the nest. Sir Toad shook his head, walking alongside him. I agree with the basic principle, Peter, but how are we going to pull it off? Simple. The boy gestured toward the rolling dunes, dotted with wrecked ships. We're getting help. Okay, that's the end. So, I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted. I don't know if the ravens are good or bad because they seem like they're looking for them, like in a bad way. But then, remember they were chanting, long live the line, long live the line. And I don't know if they're chanting that because they think Peter and Sir Toad are the line, or because they're wanting to hurt Peter and Sir Toad to save the line. What do you think? I don't know. I wish you could talk back to me right now. I wish I could hear your answers. All right, so tomorrow we will start with chapter 12. You see Abby's changed positions. Every time my voice got excited, though, she would jump up. She would put her head up and look at me, afraid that I was upset. Okay, I hope you guys have a good day. If you have any questions about your work, make sure you send me an email. Or if you can figure out Seesaw, you can send a post and I will comment there. I really hope all of you might take a little bit of time to try Seesaw because I think you'll like it. Let me see what else. Try not to give your parents a hard time. They're trying their best too. Do the best you can. That's all we all can do right now. And know that Miss Gaines and I are working all day long trying to make it so that you guys have some really fun learning experiences, but we also have to get our work done, just like we did at school. So I even saw messages coming in from Miss Gaines as I was videoing this. So I better get off and see what she was saying to me, right? All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.